This is Burn This Book, a podcast where we, Nicole and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. Today we have two special guests with us from EveryLibrary and from PEN America. From EveryLibrary, we have Peter Bromberg, and from PEN America, we have Taslyn Magnuson. Welcome.
Woo! Welcome!
This is an exciting day for us.
It's giving us street cred that we've never had before.
Yeah.
First off, why don't we start with just asking, let's start with Peter and talking about EveryLibrary. And can you just explain what that is? And then Taslyn, could you explain what PEN America is? And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty questions.
So EveryLibrary is a nonprofit that does work to build voter support for libraries across the country. We have been around for about 12 years now. We started really by trying to build support for campaigns to bring initiatives before the voters to fund libraries. And we still do that. That's still our bread and butter. Of course, over the last 3 years, we have become much more involved in the anti-censorship work. And so we're working with over 100 grassroots groups around the country, just average Americans, parents who are seeing censorship attacked on libraries happening in their communities and their school districts, and helping them to get organized and giving them the tools and the resources and the knowledge and the one-on-one human support. Like, here's my cell number, call anytime, let's have regular conversations, that kind of ongoing tactical, strategic support and emotional support to do this work effectively. And then along with that, working to fight and to overturn bad legislation in the state houses across the country, while also promoting positive model legislation to protect our rights to read. So that's EveryLibrary. We also have a C3 side, more of a traditional nonprofit that does training and research and a lot of publications. We have a peer-reviewed journal and all that good stuff. But EveryLibrary, the C4 side, is really the political work side of things.
Wow, that's a lot of work. And it's a relatively young organization. I didn't realize that. I thought you'd been around for like dozens of years.
Not yet.
Not yet. But wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. How did you get involved personally, Peter?
So thanks for that question. So EveryLibrary was started by John Frasta, who I got to know when we were both working together. Well, John was the membership director at the American Library Association, and I was helping to put together a new program there called the Emerging Leaders Program, which is, young librarians who, have promise, that kind of thing, have them do some leadership cohort stuff. So I got to know him there, and then he left American Library Association to start EveryLibrary. This is a little bit of a shorter version of it. Because he saw that 90% of funding for public libraries comes from basically the will of the voters, right? I mean, why do we have public libraries at all? Because voters say, hey, that is something that I care about, so I'm willing to reach into my wallet and pay some tax money. And we saw that lots of times, libraries go to the voters, and they weren't really running effective campaigns to tell the voters, here's the benefit to you, here's what we'll do with the money. And so they were losing. So a lot of money for libraries was getting left on the table. So EveryLibrary was founded to help work with libraries, but also with civilians, just Americans who care about libraries, to pass these initiatives so that libraries would be funded. So because I already knew John from our work together at the American Library Association, I was invited to join the board. And I've been sitting on the board of EveryLibrary since almost the beginning, while also occasionally doing some fly into a city or a county and do the actual on-the-ground consulting work, helping libraries and their boards to figure out how to do the information-only campaign, and then working with citizen ballot committees to do that voter identification, get out the vote, knock on doors, all of that, yard signs, all that good old-fashioned campaigning work. So again, I've been involved with EveryLibrary since I think 2012, and then in 2021, I don't know time, it's fuzzy after COVID.
That was all a blur.
I left my job. Yeah. Yeah. So I've now been working full time for EveryLibrary for about 3.5 years, just with pretty much a anti-censorship work.
Wow.
That's
Something
amazing.
that you brought up that Eden and I talk about a lot is how we didn't even really know what libraries did other than providing books until we started this project. And then we've learned about all of the different aspects of how libraries impact communities, just as like safe spaces, internet, teaching classes. Also, there's like community resource specialists who will help you file your taxes or understand what resources are even available. And it's all for free to the person just walking in. It takes tax money, but I had no idea what value libraries were doing for our communities until someone taught me. And so I just think this work is so important because I do want more taxes to go to this stuff.
Hmm.
I really, it's
Yeah.
important. If we lose libraries, all those resources are gone. Real quick, if you don't mind, we're going to pivot to Taslin, and then I hope to have both of you kind of talk about your experiences and things like that. Just so Taslin's not sitting there waiting for 25 minutes because there's so much to talk about EveryLibrary. But I have a feeling similar goals will be talked about afterwards. If that's okay, Taslin, can you tell us about PEN America and how you got acquainted?
Got acquainted. PEN America is much older than EveryLibrary. It's 100 years old, 101 maybe now.
I didn't know.
And
Incredible. That's
it's
a ton of dozens of years.
yeah, a ton of dozens of years. It's basically about defending the freedom to read, and they say that they like stand at the intersection of literature and human rights. But basically, there are pens across the world that do that same work. PEN America is the biggest, and they defend the writer's right to write and to read. I am proudly representing PEN's mission quite poorly right now because I'm stumbling over my words, but because I'm a consultant with the Freedom to Read team. So I'm much more acquainted with the Freedom to Read's kind of space and the book ban space with them. I actually started all of this kind of independently, which we can talk about it. It's a long story, but and that's how I met Peter and EveryLibrary. Is they host some of my research on the EveryLibrary Institute webpage for book bans. And then I do similar research with the Freedom to Read team. And I kind of sit between PEN America and EveryLibrary often in having these conversations.
That's awesome. Could you tell us more about that research?
Sure. I'm not a librarian. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a First Amendment specialist. But I did go to school for writing for children and young adults. There's an MFA program. There's a couple of them in the country, and there was one in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I decided this is what I had always wanted to do. So I went through the program. I met kid lit writers. I only ever really read children's literature because it's amazing. It's crafted well. It's profound. It's beautiful. And it's amusing in ways that adult literature did not appeal to me in the same way. So in 21, I was finished with the program and hanging out online, as you are often doing as a not yet published writer and a poet, and teaching classes. And people started to talk about book bans. And people like Laurie Halse, who has been banned so many times since Speak, her novel came out. But she said, something's going on. I'm getting banned a lot more than usual. I'm hearing from a lot more librarians. And so she said, someone should keep track. And I said, oh, I know how to do that. And Laurie Halse asked, and she is a writer hero, and I can do that. So I started to put together a spreadsheet, and I just sent it out into the world of like where I was hearing these news articles. I tried to separate out where it was happening, what books were under attack. I worked with Kelly Jensen of Book Riot really early on, and because she tracks censorship and has for years, and so I just built off of her work. And then John Kraska at EveryLibrary said, I've been hearing your name evoked by librarians in secret. Can you please Like, let's put your spreadsheet somewhere where librarians can get to it. And I had started to hear from librarians across the country who were shocked, dismayed, and they said like they didn't know that they were not alone, right? And so they said my spreadsheet was really important, and authors were telling me it was really important to have this information and have this information public. And so when John asked me, I was like, sure, I can do that. And I just kept counting. And PEN America asked me to join the Freedom to Read team to do sort of a more refined count around school book bans. And I've just been counting ever since.
That's incredible. That's like such solution-oriented journalism. Like you're making a real impact. That's so amazing that you had that motivation also. Like I got chills just knowing that other librarians were reading it, people were finding it, and it was important. And that's really cool. That's really inspiring.
I do think John Kraska still has a screenshot he took of my spreadsheet being shown somewhere that he's like, I need to figure out who this person is. Because it was just, I didn't even know how to name a spreadsheet. It was like censorship attacks.
That's
I love
amazing.
And I love books. So.
Yeah.
I love authors. That's amazing.
No, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to offer that Taslin, I mean, she's not just a book counter. I think Taslin is, and I'm not exaggerating, the single human who has had the most positive impact in America regarding book banning, because she's got the database, but it's the relationships and her emotional intelligence, empathy. I mean, married with a deep, smart, strategic mind. Anyway. I just want to brag on my friend because she's amazing. But I'll shut up and let her brag for herself.
I love that brag.
Yeah,
that's very nice. Thank you. I mean, I do what I have found is I kept track because I deeply admired authors. And what I found was so many people who were hurting and in trouble and feeling like they were alone. And I can listen and I can validate. I mean, I don't have the librarian technical degrees or the law degrees, but I can listen and I can tell them they're not alone. And I think that's really important. I mean, I don't do anything magical or special. I just listen to people who tell me what's happening, and it's really awful. And sometimes that's what they need to keep going and to keep fighting for books and for readers in their community. And then I've gotten to know a lot of people. I have like librarian Twitter fans, which is funny to me.
That's amazing. Is there a story that comes to mind as like an example of the things that authors are going through and librarians?
Well, for authors, I heard from them right away. Like they didn't know they were banned, or they were being asked through like direct messages on social media to please help save my book. And I thought it was really strange. Like authors you don't know and you're banned. Well, once a book is sold, it just goes out into the world. And so they were hearing from students and fans and librarians, and they didn't know what to do. Authors are not exactly always equipped to deal with bans. Like they love to write their books. They like the creative freedom. They're working on new stories. They're maybe introverted. And so I was trying to provide methods or ways to handle some of that stress from them. But I know authors who've had to contact the FBI, who've had death threats, who have been, their entire incomes have been decimated. So when you make money as a children's author, you're making money both from publishing a book for a very small amount of money. Like, let's be clear, it's not like making money. It's you receive some cash for your book. And then the rest of your income is often built by school visits, library visits, appearances, conversations, and they've lost all of that. And so one author that I know, he went from having 45 to 60 school visits average for the past 10 years to having one for 2025.
Wow.
And so their income is taking a hit. The book sales are down. And these are all majority diverse literature. So it's LGBTQ voices, BIPOC voices. I could go on and on. the hit to the hit to authors is real and significant, and authors have done something pretty amazing. They created Authors Against Book Bans to work together to both support each other and also then to be able to speak collectively, both to legislatures, to communities, to speak in support of books. And this includes authors who are banned and not banned, because everybody can speak to this issue. And they also do a special job that I think is really important, is they reach out to these communities that have been fighting for 3 years. And they talk to them and they tell them how important it is. And I have watched whole communities like shift momentum. They might have been discouraged, they might have been stressed, but like one author calls them and tells them they're so grateful, and all of a sudden they have the energy to continue. And I think that that's a really incredible role that authors can play.
When you say communities, are you talking about like school communities or like county communities, or are you talking about communities of other authors?
Communities under attack. So like basically schools, school districts, public library, counties. Like I work with Peter a lot on the Fight for the First stuff, and we're meeting with school librarians, we're meeting with schools, we're meeting with parents, we're meeting with public library officials, like across the board.
Gotcha.
And often when censorship starts in one place, it jumps to the public library. If it starts in the public library, it jumps to the schools, because it's not about the books.
Yeah.
It's like a bad case of lice. You know?
It's not about the books. And also, you mentioned Fight for the First, but I'm not sure if we previously mentioned Fight for the First. So
Go ahead.
fightforthefirst.org. Fight for the First is a platform / service that EveryLibrary has put on the web to enable anyone anywhere in America to begin a campaign, form a group to fight back against censorship. And it's not just that, oh, here's the link and good luck. It's a set of tools and platforms, but it also comes with basically human contact. That's me, that's Haslin, that's others at EveryLibrary. And so part of the reason I was a minute late to logging on to our podcast today, because I was just jumping off a call with a parent who's in a county in Pennsylvania where fighting some bad stuff that's going on there. And so they're going to work with Fight for the First, but again, they're going to have my cell phone number and my Calendly link and et cetera.
Wow.
And, you know, if they need to talk at 7:00 in the morning on a Tuesday or, you know, at 3:00 in the afternoon on a Saturday, assuming that, you know, I'm not, you know, at the market or something like, so we're providing this very human connection and to the point of it not just being about the books. This particular school has contracted with a very conservative, so-called conservative religious law firm, the Independence Law Center, that has an agenda. It's a very anti-LGBTQ agenda to go into schools and to remake policies in a way that matches their own very conservative, restrictive religious beliefs. So it's not just about schools. It's about curriculum. It's about pronouns. It's about bathrooms. It's about being able to participate in sports. It's about a student's ability to feel safe in their own school and to be treated with the dignity that every human being should be treated with, and that the parents and the families that may not look the way, you know, some people think a family should look, to be treated with respect, with dignity, should be afforded the full rights. So yes, the books are part of it, but it is part of a larger and well-funded and relatively well-organized attempt to reshape American society into a vision that is theocratic, and that's that leads to harm for many Americans. How's that for an upper?
Yeah.
No, that was important.
The good news is we're fighting back, and we're making progress, winning when we get organized into that.
Yeah,
Just to put a positive spin on it.
No,
it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
You know, we're engaged in a fight, but you know.
But we need to know the ramifications, why this matters, because I think a lot of people are like, well, it's a book. I don't know. So what? There's so many books. But to what both of you are saying is it harkens to a bigger, deeper issue. The books are just the little tangible symbols of what's really going on. And one more follow-up to Teslin is with these authors, you said like that they're dealing with like death threats and things like that. I didn't even think about that when it came to book banning. I just was like, oh, I'm sure that, yeah, they're having a hard time selling the book in wherever they're selling it. But I didn't even think about the implications of their whole life is being overthrown and people are very mad at them on a personal level. So what can authors do who are experiencing that, or librarians who are experiencing threats? And whoever wants to answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can start with the authors. And I have spoken to so many, so many librarians who also have faced similar attacks, being doxxed online, being having strange people show up at your place of employment. Authors have had people call their day jobs and say that did they know that they're pedophiles. So when this happens, and it happens far more than we would like, there are a couple of things that are going on. And we offer through PEN America connections with social media harassment training that was originally developed for newspaper reporters, but they've been working on creating a space where authors can speak to that. So that's one place. There are other organizations that I just go along and I collect information, right? And I collect connections with people. And so if I find out that an author needs immediate security issues, I have a couple of numbers that I can try to call. And all I'm doing is like, I'm just connecting people. Mm-hmm. But that's the kind of situation that we're in with far too many authors and librarians who need immediate questions answered and somebody to talk to about very real security concerns. I just talked to an author recently who has a go bag ready to go in case someone shows up with guns at her home. Because there's people who are that riled up and angry at what she's written. And it's very serious and very real. And I know of authors who are also now working on event safety. So when they are in events, how do they, what is a bookstore doing? I had one author working with a bookstore who now you have to, rather than just being an open call for a reading, you have to register ahead of time, which reduces the amount of people that could possibly come. And you have, when we came to the event, we had to pass by a person checking us on a list, and then the door was locked because you just don't know. And the fear itself, I think for both librarians and authors, is an additional chilling effect, right? Should I write that? Should I really write that book of my heart that I needed when I was 16 or 14? If it's going to cause me and my family to be under such strain and stress. Or for librarians, should I still order those books? Should I still even talk to kids about things, given what might happen to me? And I know, like every library, we've also talked to people about security questions and issues, and not professionals. I'm always like, I'm not a professional. Right. I can listen to your fear and talk to you about that and tell you you're not alone.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Dark. But it's real. It is very, real. Very real.
It's one thing that I appreciate that you both do is that you're giving us the facts, but I know that you're also going to follow up with the actionable steps we can take. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't feel like we're in this pit of despair. There is some light at the end of the tunnel, even if it might be a long tunnel with people hidden in the darkness, But what are some of those things that we could do as community members?
Yeah.
Peter? Yeah.
I mean, so I'm gonna say organize And I think the bumper sticker here is show up and speak up. Because this is really what makes a difference. And one of the things that I really learned from Taslin is this idea of that school board members or public library board members or county council members are making these terrible decisions to ban books. And again, it's not just about the books, it's about erasing the people. When there's no pushback, it's a consequence-free zone for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're getting some people showing up, screaming at them about books. So it's easy for them to just pull them and to violate their own policies, to violate the law, to not really pause for a moment and think about, the broader picture, to think about the kids who might be harmed, et cetera. And so they're just responding in a very emotional way to anger. We have to change the political calculus for a politician, for an elected school board member, et cetera, so that before they take those books off the shelf, before they change that policy, they're going to have to think about, is there going to be some pushback? Is this going to harm my reputation? Is this going to harm my electability? If there's some consequence for doing this thing, now that's a different political calculation. And we are dealing oftentimes with politicians who are making these calculations. They might even be thinking, can I fundraise off this, right?
Yeah.
So by showing up and speaking up in numbers that are too many to ignore, this is how we start to change the tide. And depending on the community and the issues, it's all very local. Sometimes you can show up once, you win, and the policy is overturned or it's not passed, and the storm passes, and that's it. Other communities, we're looking probably at years of having to show up, speak up, get organized, build coalitions, because there's boards that have been taken over and we need to reclaim board seats. And there's, we know from poll after poll, there's a recent Knight Foundation poll that shows that Americans just deeply oppose book banning, but they're not necessarily aware that it's happening in their community. So there's this work of showing up and speaking up in a public manner, writing letters to the editor, writing op-eds, tabling at the farmer's market. There's a whole range of things that you can do to build awareness of people in your community about what's going on. And then once people become aware, it's moving them from unaware to aware, and then awareness to action. So now that you know what's going on, will you send this email? Will you show up at this event? Will you speak at the board meeting? Will you, right? And we do see that when we do this, it's very, very effective. So again, some communities, we're going to have some quick wins. Most communities, we might have a short-term win, but then there's some medium and some long-term work that still needs to be done, which comes back to how do we organize effectively in a sustainable manner, which means how do we keep our energy levels up, and how do we celebrate, and how do we build community, and that reinforcement that we're coming together because we care about something important, we care about human beings, we care about a set of values. And that's why we're going to get out of bed tomorrow and do this again, even though some days it might seem like a slog.
Yeah.
I just want to follow up. One of the things I tell people, when I'm given the chance to talk to either school board members or library trustees, I encourage them to be prepared to be called to all of these things and to practice and listen to yourself. So if there are people who serve in those roles listening, practice being called a pedophile, because if you listen to it and you practice for that moment, when it comes at you on the other side of a comment, you'll be prepared and you won't act, because the goal of these kind of inflammatory moments is to make you act without thought, act against policy, as Peter said. And so that's what I always encourage. And trustees are like, what do you mean? I'm going to be called a pedophile? Probably. Yeah. Probably. And so prepare for that moment, listen to it, hear yourself being called that. So then you know in turn how to act. And I think that that's something that many people who serve in these roles have not thought about and have not prepared themselves for. And then secondly, I tell people you don't need to answer the crazy rhetoric when you're going to speak out. I want you to speak publicly and positively about your community. So whether you're talking for books or children in your community, public comment in a meeting under our system of government is like a magical open mic moment. right?
Yeah.
Where you can give your thoughts about the community and what's on the agenda. And so the thing is most of the time we only like to give our negative thoughts. So you really have to train yourself and practice saying the positive thoughts. So a lot of times the first time someone speaks up, I'm like, go tell them that you love your librarian. Go say at that city council meeting how important the library is to you. And you just got 3 minutes to say, or sometimes 1 minute, to say what you want. And when you're saying that, you're changing the temperature in the room. You're reminding all of those quiet folks who are there, who don't like book bans, that you're there. You'll have their back. You'll support them as they make decisions. And that's very important. But again, just like with the trustees, you have to practice speaking positively and publicly. And you have to do it before the emergency comes. And so that's why I tell people, start with your favorite book, start with your favorite librarian, thank your board for their service. Yes, there are lots of boards that have been taken over and we need to do that work. But being there, being present, and being positive about the role of a library in your life, that makes a difference. And you're building kind of the foundation to shift the conversation. And sometimes we're a little bit late, but we're still working in every community.
Yeah. Can I add to that? I kind of buried the lead in my answer a little bit, I guess, which is reach out to every library, go to everylibrary.org, go to fightforthefirst.org, because we can help you get organized so that you can take effective collective action. Showing up and speaking up as an individual is powerful and makes a difference. Showing up and speaking up in a group of 10 or 20 or 50 or 300 obviously has exponential value to that. And so, again, if you go to fightforthefirst.org or everylibrary.org, it's a set of tools. It's not just a set of tools. You'll get a human being connecting with you, very likely me and or Taslin and or some of our colleagues, and that so that we can give you information, we can give you resources, including money, to help to build that team quickly. So that if you're just one person or two people, what we can do through petitions and through social media advertising options. The goal of the petition is not to walk up the hall of, the steps of City Hall and hand it to the mayor and say, look, we have 1,000 signatures. You can do that and there's a place for it. But it's really to identify supporters quickly. And because every library puts money behind social media ads on petitions, within 24 to 48 hours, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of other people in your community who have said, oh, I didn't know about this, or now that I know about it, here's my name and email. What do I need to do? Where do I need to go? Tell me when to send an email, etc. So building that team quickly is highly correlated with success. And again, because we're humans and if we're going to try to put all this on our own backs, we're going to burn out weeks or days, right?
Yeah.
But if you have a team that is standing with you, then you're going to be much more likely to be able to take effective action over the long haul. So everylibrary.org, fightforthefirst.org. Reach out to us. You're not alone.
That's so important. I worked with this one Fight for the First community in Virginia, and their funding was being taken away. And so I had this experience. I was calling into a meeting that they were having so I could give some thoughts and advice and encourage them as they were coming forward for this meeting. But they literally carried me around on their phone to meet all these people, right? And I was getting a little motion sick. They would be like, look, I didn't know her until I had this experience of working on this. I had no idea she lived in my community, or I had no idea he thought the same thing. And then here we found each other, and they found each other through like the technical tool of Fight for the First, and that pulled them together. And it was just such an incredible experience to be carried around on a phone. And they were like, thank you so much. I'm like, thank you, because you're there and I'm on a Zoom. Like, I'm just here cheering you on. But I think that it's really hard work and you can burn out, but also the community building and creation that you're doing as you're speaking for things in your community, that makes a big difference. And together we're always strong.
Yeah. I love that. I feel like you both humanized it so much, and I feel really hopeful and optimistic. I really do. I'm going to get on fightforthefirst.org after this and sign up. I have a question for Peter. Peter, from what I understand, you had the Let Utah Read program. Can you explain that and kind of, just for everyone listening, where Peter's in Utah, Taslin's not in Utah, I'm not in Utah, Eden's in Utah, so it's not like we're just only talking about Utah all the time. But Utah keeps getting itself in the news about more book bannings and anti-pornography legislation and things like that. And so can you kind of share with us what's going on there, and also what Let Utah Read is about, and kind of help us see how we can create this in our own communities? I'm in Colorado. Taslin, you're in Wisconsin or Minnesota? Wisconsin. Yes. Wisconsin. I knew it. I was like, it's one of those top ones. One of those, yeah. Close to Canada
She's
ones.
close enough to Minnesota that's, she can.
But it was
pop
really
over.
offensive. I'm sorry. A mile? Okay. Boundaries. What are they?
Somebody hits a home run on the Little League field, the ball lands in Minnesota.
Exactly.
So, yeah, and then they have an extradition treaty to get the ball back. It's a whole production.
It's like a whole thing, yeah.
It's a whole thing.
What's causing the rise in book banning? On my podcast, Velshi Banned Book Club, I speak with authors of banned books to try and find out.
I think what they're really objecting to is that a young person has perceived the hypocrisy and corruption of the generation that has created their world.
This book saved me in a lot of ways, and then I published it hoping to help people find a blueprint to heal.
Season 2 of Velshi Banned Book Club. Listen now, wherever you get your podcasts.
So thanks for asking about Let Utah Read. I'll talk about what's happening in Utah and Let Utah Read. And in case I forget, by the time I get to the end of my answer, there's Let Utah Reads happening in different versions across many states, and we can talk about those two. So what's happening in Utah? There have been 2 laws passed over the last few years that have made it much easier for school districts, if they're so inclined, to ban books. So that was happening from 2002, 3, 4. Books were coming off the shelves. And I'm trying to think of the non-technical, non-wonky way to describe this, but basically the legislature said, well, if books, they have any sexual content in them, whatever, any mention, any depiction or description, regardless of the overall context, regardless of the value of the book, regardless of that this is a book that's on a high school shelf, that it's a classic work by Toni Morrison or Margaret Atwood or Sherman Alexie or whomever, it's got a mention, it says the word masturbation, so that book is now considered pornography, it's considered obscene, and it has to be removed from the shelves. So we had a law that was in place from 2002 that led to a lot of books coming off the shelf. There was still some wiggle room for libraries to do what's called consider the book as a whole, actually read the book and then determine, well, in context, that's still appropriate for a 17-year-old, so we're going to leave it. Last year, the legislature passed a new law that solidified these definitions, that made it harder for libraries to maintain books on the shelf regardless of their quality, and also said that if 3 school districts in Utah ban a book, or 2 school districts and 5 charters ban a book, then everyone has to ban the book. So this is unprecedented. It has led now to a so-called no-read list of 13 books in Utah that no school district is allowed to have, because 3 small school districts somewhere made a decision that those books are inappropriate. And so it's taken away local control. School boards are elected locally in Utah, and they pass their own policies of what should or shouldn't be on the shelf that librarians are then, bound to interpret and follow, et cetera. And that power has been taken away from local school boards, which means that power has been taken away from local voters to have these discussions with their school board members and decide, what kind of collection policies they want to have. So that's led to that we know of 150 books that have come off the shelf. I say that what we know of because over the last few years, schools have been banning books, but they have not been required to report the books that they have been banning. So some have reported them publicly. The Salt Lake Tribune did some investigative reporting a year ago and doing public records requests. We call them grandma requests in Utah. Was able to surface other books that have been banned. But we know that 150 is an undercount. So that's what's been happening. So Let Utah Read came about where I was up at the Capitol Hill with some colleagues. And I should say, in addition to working for EveryLibrary, I co-chair the advocacy committee for the Utah Library Association. And so I was up at a hearing on one of these bills in that capacity with my colleague, Rebecca Cummings, who is co-chair and also running for lieutenant governor. That's another story. A good story, but a separate story. So we were up at the Hill and we were at these hearings, and we then came out into the hall after a terrible hearing, and we're like, oh my gosh, this terrible bill. And Billy Palmer from the ACLU was there, and Paisley Reckdahl, who is an amazing poet and author, who is also the PEN America chapter leader for Utah, was there. And we said, we got to do something about this. And so we just literally in the hallway of the Capitol in Utah just said, well, let's form a statewide coalition. So we did. So it was EveryLibrary, Utah Library Association, ACLU, and PEN America. And since then, the League of Utah Writers has joined as a coalition member. And what we do is we work in a variety of ways through petitions and events and public speaking and tabling at the farmers market and doing banned books bingo and whatever, in partnership with bookstores, build our list of Utahns who care. And I say build a list, that sounds very technical. We're working to educate and inform Utahns about what's happening if they don't already know, and if you are interested in learning more, staying in the loop, and or receiving action alerts when you need to maybe show up at your school board meeting or show up at the Capitol or send an email, give us your email address. We'll keep you informed. So we have built a list of thousands of Utahns who care. And it's just doing this educational work combined with the action of, okay, here's the actions we need to take together to turn this tide. There's been a sort of a chapter of Let Utah Read is Let Davis Read. We have some very engaged humans in Davis County who have seen that Davis County School District has really been a hotbed of book banning. And in fact, they have a history of violating the civil rights of their students, so that the federal government has gotten involved a number of times. The Office of Civil Rights has gotten involved with Davis County School District a number of times over the years. And so what we see there is kind of what Davis County has done historically is take actions that are infringing on the civil rights of their students. But we have a Let Davis Read group there who is showing up at the school board meetings, forming really strong relationships with school board members, and making a difference at making some changes to policies, and having some influence in building awareness in Davis County of what's happening. So that's what we're doing in Utah. And then again, I'll invite Taslin if she cares to talk about things like Florida Freedom to Read Project, Texas Freedom to Read Project. There's Read Freely Alabama. We have, I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple other states, but there's some other states that we're working with to grow them and to support them as they kind of have different regional or local groups come together as a statewide group to take more effective statewide action.
Yeah, Taslin, if you want to touch on that, that would be great. And one thing we're going to clarify real quick. I think you said the year 2002. Did you mean 2022, Peter?
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying that.
No, Taslin. Yeah. She found it. She's good. She's good. She's our journalist. She's out there witnessing and reporting.
Yeah.
But something I really loved also about what you guys were saying is that in Davis County, sometimes I like to look at communities. This is such like a horrible way of living my life, but I'll just look at a community and be like, they're too far gone. Moving on. Let's focus on Salt Lake County. I think that's just how a lot of us just conceptualize life and figure out how to deal with all these issues. Like, well, it's not Florida, so moving on. Florida's going to deal with itself. But what you touched on is there are people in every community who want this, and there are good people, and like what Taslin was saying about like going in and acknowledging the good that's in our communities. No matter what battles we're fighting, there's always still a lot of good, and humanizing that and putting that into the fight, I think is so worthwhile. But yeah, sorry, Taslin.
No, that's a really great point. I'll talk about too, like the very first contact, I think it was the first one on Fight for the First that turned into Read Freely Alabama, came from a former high school student who had been bullied, who was concerned about LGBTQ books being removed in his library. And he had found 3 other people And I sat on this very early call in Prattville, Alabama, and they were like, we didn't know. Like, we don't know what to do. And slowly but surely, they've built, I think, a really cohesive, not statewide group to respond. And they do it locally. They do it the Alabama way. They do it finding their messages. And I think that's really important. But yeah, Florida Freedom to Read Project is, I think they're fftrp.org. Maybe. Cross your fingers. But if you just Google Florida Freedom to Read Project, they are a group run by two parents who are doing this all pro bono work and doing the incredible work of holding Florida accountable by documenting the bans and the impact of those bans on students and teachers and schools across Florida. And they are supported by EveryLibrary, in that EveryLibrary created their website and supports them with ideas. But really, it's these two moms who are just working for their community. And I think that you find that everywhere. No state is too red. Both Alabama and Florida and Texas, for that matter, where we have Texas Freedom to Read Project, which is like, they call themselves sister groups, basically, Florida and Texas. And they're groups of parents who are working to fight and speak for the books in their community, speak for the teachers, the educators, the librarians. And they are doing all of this and finding so many people who are of like minds, similar minds, allies, connections. So like, once we dig in, no community, it's not too late for any community. I've watched the Texas folks too encounter deep conservative areas. And what they find, I think we've said it a couple different times, is that most people don't like book bans. And most people don't want you to tell them what to read and how to teach kids. They want their educators in their community. They want the local control of their school boards. They want all of those things to be okay in their community. And so once alerted to the problem, are ready to speak up. And it's in every community. I always tell people, everywhere where I find a book ban on my list, I find community working together. Sometimes little, and they need some help. And sometimes they're already well organized by the time I show up.
I love that. Peter, did you have
That's really inspiring.
Oh, sorry, Eden.
Oh, yes.
I concur. It's inspiring.
We're all on the same page. Excellent. Excellent. I have a quick question. Sorry. And then I'm going to be done asking all the questions. I'm going to turn the time over to Eden. But we do have a lot of people in more conservative religious groups, or just living a more conservative life, that are very afraid of all the changes that are happening in the world, that listen. And what advice would you give them when they're encountering book bans? I think because I want people to feel control when it comes to what books their kids are reading. I want them to feel safe about going to the library and feel like they can do it. How can we, is there like this is a question I didn't even prep you guys with, so if you don't have an answer, I'll edit this whole thing out. But is there a way to frame this conversation for people who are concerned about their child being exposed to pornography or something like that, who do genuinely feel the fear?
I mean, I think that there are many parents who have genuine concerns, and I think what's unfortunate is that people who are really behind book banning are trying to stoke those fears for political gain, and that there's a lot of disinformation, which is different than misinformation. People who know better are saying things like, "Oh, there's pornography in schools," or when no, there's not. So for parents who have concern, if I was having a face-to-face conversation, first I would take a page from Taslin's book and do a lot of listening, because I want to honor people's legitimate concerns and fears about their children. I mean, that's a very human response. And I would want to assure them and maybe help them to understand that what are on the shelves in school libraries and how books get there. you have a school board that passes a policy. You can talk to the school board. You could look at that policy. Then we have librarians who have, at least at minimum, a 14-week semester course in how to develop a collection for kids and for students. And what are they doing? They're looking at that policy that probably says what books are age appropriate, what books are very well reviewed, what authors are respected, that these win awards, are these books that are known to be developmentally appropriate and helpful for teens. And explain that not every book is right for every teen, right? I mean, that some books that we have kids and students coming into libraries from all sorts of backgrounds with all different sets of experiences, from family backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds that might create a lot of challenges for some of these kids that your son or daughter may not experience, right? And so these books are there for everybody. Now, for your child, we can always have a conversation about what do you want your kid to read? Like, I'm happy to talk to you as a librarian, as an educator, about what you want your kids to read or not read, and to try to develop a reading list or help your son or daughter or your child find the books that are appropriate for them. And then I would also encourage them and remind them about their role as a parent, right? That we don't want to parent your kids. The school doesn't want to parent your kids. We want you to parent your kids. We want to be here to support you. So what do parents do? Set boundaries. Don't watch that. Don't go to that website. Don't stay out after 10 o'clock at night. Don't watch that TV show. It's a lot of, and don't do those things because I love you, and here's our family's belief systems or value systems, and here's the consequences for violating those. Right? This is just parenting. This is always parenting regard. So I want to empower you to understand which books we have on the shelf, and if you have concerns about them, I want to talk to you about the books, and I want to help you have these conversations with your own child, while respecting the fact that other parents have different situations, different realities, and respect their right to have those conversations with their. That's easier said than done, and it's much easier done when it's one-on-one, face-to-face. That's where we can have these types of conversations. It's much harder to do it in a board meeting where there's 30 people screaming about pornography and pedophilia and just throwing misinformation around. And I think to just put a point on this, in those situations, remembering who our audience is, that we're not necessarily going to be successful in changing the mind of someone who has been radicalized to believe that their school is being taken over by Marxist indoctrinating. That's not our audience. The audience are the vast number of people in the middle, whether they're on the left of the middle or the right of the middle, who trust teachers, who trust librarians, who appreciate the value of their public schools, and who are open to having a rational, reasonable conversation, and want to be heard.
I have one thought to add to that, and then I want Peter to remember what Shannon Hale says, because I can never, and I was just trying to find it online, because I think that speaks to this really well. But I would encourage any parent who has concerns about what their kids might have access to or read is to have a conversation with their librarian and their educator, because what I've found is most parents aren't having that conversation. They're just going right to the challenge forms, right to the yelling, right, and all of their real, honest, legitimate concerns and worry for their own children are being taken and manipulated and used in ways that are really harmful to other people in their community. But librarians they want to have these conversations. They want to talk to you about your kids and what you'd like them to read and how to read and what literacy concerns there might be. And what they're saying is nobody's asking them. They're just demonizing and criticizing them. And I think that's really important to remember. And then Shannon Hale, who is a children's lit author, who is a famous Utah children's lit author, says this really beautifully. Do you remember how she says it?
Yeah, it says, in cultures where discussions of sex are taboo, predators flourish. And that's because so many of the books that are being challenged and removed books and they're being labeled pornography and obscenity, are books that deal with in some way sexual assault, sexual abuse, etc., and that removing these books from high school shelves and not letting teenagers see or a story about or a story that includes some sexual abuse that harms them because it takes away their ability to recognize danger. These books would give them an opportunity to have the language, perhaps, to set boundaries for bodily autonomy, to understand that it's not their fault, to understand that there are pathways to report abuse to adults. It helps them protect themselves, their siblings, their friends. And removing these books is harmful. And really, it is the predators who flourish when these books are taken off the shelves. And we know from statistics from the Utah Women in Leadership Project here in Utah that 13% of young people in Utah report being molested. 1 in 5 girls have reported sexual violence to themselves in the last 12 months. So this is an epidemic. This is a problem in Utah, particularly where in the culture here in Utah, there's perhaps additional pressures not to report things. There may not be a sense of safety or a sense that there might be a sense if I'm abused or touched or that it's my fault, that I was too alluring, that I was too something. So this is a real problem in Utah. It's everywhere, but Utah has its own specific set of problems, just statistically. What's really upsetting to me is that these statistics that I just quoted you are from a document that's literally posted on the Utah legislature's website because they had to review these statistics when considering some other legislation that had to do with sexual violence in Utah, et cetera. So they have these statistics. They know the impact. And yet they're still passing a law that is so overbroad that it's just sweeping and purging these books off the shelves. The long-term damage of that, it's depressing to think about the long-term impact that this is going to have on young women in Utah.
Yeah, I love that you brought all of that up because the impact, like there's a clear line, and we know it's hard to recognize abuse when it's so normal that you need someone to tell you that it's not, and that is often in books. That's often the safest place for that to happen. Horrifying that it's on the Utah legislative website, and that it clearly hasn't been applied to decision making.
Yeah. Just for our listeners at home, just one other thing I'd like to add, which is the 13 books that have been banned statewide in Utah on the no-read list. 12 of those 13 books are written by women, and the top 5 banned books in all of Utah are by women. This is not a coincidence, right? They are, and I forget who I was on a call yesterday, but someone was talking about the trends in book banning, and it started with the so-called anti-CRT books, and then it kind of moved on to focus on anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans books. And I'm sorry I don't remember who was saying this, but that the trend now is really focusing on books by or about women and women's sexuality. So, and we're seeing that clearly as a target in Utah.
Wow.
100% nationally, like what you see in, I mean, this is another thing, like Utah, Texas, Florida, they aren't different. They're just maybe 6 to 12 months ahead of other places in the country. And so that's why it's so important to listen to what's happening in these states.
That's a good lesson. Thank you. Eden, did you have any last questions or thoughts?
Well, first, thank you for coming on. You can hear my baby is upset about the state of Utah, the state that he'll be growing up in. So we'll be having that conversation later and talk about this. But yeah, to close out, do you guys have any book recommendations for both Activism, from the banned books list, something that you want people who are interested in learning more about this issue, about yourselves, etc.?
So, if you want to know about the issue of book banning, my new favorite book is They Came for the Schools by Mike Hixenbaugh, because it's just brilliant. He's a brilliant journalist, and he gets right to the heart of it. I think everybody should read Speak. I think everybody should read Blood, Water, Paint by Joy McCullough. It's banned, but not as much, and it's a verse novel. I love verse novels. I think anything by Lesléa Newman. She wrote, her first book was Heather Has Two Mommies, and I think it was published in the late 80s. And she's since developed these beautiful, loving, caring stories about all kinds of families. And they're just lovely, lovely books. I could go on and on. Pete, jump in.
Yeah, I'll second It Came for Our Schools. I'll also mention Amanda Jones is a librarian in Louisiana who just published a book called That Librarian. I think is a great companion piece to Mike Hixenbaugh's book, because Mike talks about what happens in South Lake, Texas school over a period of years that really maps to what's happening across the country with organized book banning. And then Amanda Jones is a very personal story of how that impacted, how it showed up in her community and how it's impacted her individually. So it kind of humanizes and puts a very human face on what's happening with the organized book banning. In terms of activism, I always recommend The Three Languages of Politics by Arnold Klain, because it gets to how do we talk about what's happening with people who might have a different lens, political worldview, and his premise, which I think is correct, is that it's almost like we're talking different languages so that we can't hear each other. And he wrote this book to help us try to understand each other. So if we're going to talk about book banning, how do we talk about, I mean, most people who are against book banning, and certainly most librarians, are very progressive, which means we tend to talk about book banning in only progressive terms. But there are ways that we can talk about the harms of banning in ways that might feel more to a libertarian value system, to a conservative value system, and learning how to talk, not to manipulate someone else, but to talk about it in a way that they'll be able to understand and connect with their pre-existing value system, which is often increasingly deeply rooted in our own identities. And so if we're only talking about book banning in a progressive framework, we're sort of asking someone to do a complete identity transplant, to have a conversation with us about it. And that's not going to be effective. So I highly recommend Three Languages of Politics by Arnold Klain. And again, Paston's point from the banned books list, I mean, it's so hard. And I'm going to say genderqueer, because it is one of the absolutely demonized books, and there's so much misinformation about that book. And I don't know anyone who has read the book, even going into it thinking, this is smut. I saw the picture, and coming out the other end saying, I've really learned something, and I can understand why this should be on library shelves, and why it's very helpful for other people to read it, even if they're 15, 16, 17-year-old, or maybe even especially if they're 15, 16, 17 years old. It's a beautiful, beautiful memoir by Maia Kobabe. If you haven't read it yet, please go get it. Check it out from your library, purchase it from your local independent bookstore, whatever.
Yay! Whatever.
Borrow it from a friend.
Listen to our episode on it.
Yeah.
Maia's book, it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. It's, jumping off from there, so many graphic novels and so many memoirs are on these lists.
So
and if you haven't experienced graphic novels, like I was raised, I didn't have comic books. My parents didn't do comic books. So I encountered graphic novels as an adult, and they are a joy to read.
Yeah, I didn't dive in outside of the Sunday comics until now. And we read Genderqueer, Mouse, Persepolis, and I'm just like, I've been missing this whole medium. It's so fun and so interesting, and
yeah. And they have been very much under attack because it's a quick, easy visual language often. But they're just some of the most coolest ways to tell stories that I love. I know, I was looking, like I'm literally surrounded by banned books here. Just pull them up.
Oh my goodness. This was so helpful, and I feel so optimistic. I feel like I've got tools. So thank you. I've got places to go, and I feel supported. I am excited about my next steps with book banning in my community. With not book banning, with, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
We are in this together, 100%. None of us are alone.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you both again. And to our listeners, we'll catch you next time.
Yeah.
Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicola Corin and Eden Wen.
Music by myself, Nicole, and performed by my dad, Frank.